The flames had long since died, but the smoke still clung to the stones of the healer's cottage like a burial shroud. Arya knelt in the ash, her knees bruised against the cold ground, fingers trembling as they traced the scorched outline of what had once been her only home. The air tasted of charred wood and something deeper, something that reminded her of the night she had been found as an infant. Abandoned, they said, wrapped in a cloth too fine for an orphan, left at the edge of the Northern Empire's poorest district where no one asked questions and fewer still offered answers. She was 18 now, though the years had not been kind. Her body was slight, too thin from rationed meals and endless labor. Her skin pale from spending most of her days indoors tending to wounds that were never her own. Her hair, a shade of silver blonde that caught the moonlight in ways that made the villagers uneasy, was tied back in a frayed braid. Her eyes, a strange amber that seemed to glow faintly in the dark, had learned early to look downward, to avoid drawing attention, to survive in a world that had no patience for those without family, without name, without power. The healer who had taken her in, old Marin, had been the closest thing to a mother she had ever known. Marin had taught her the properties of herbs, the way to set a broken bone, the whispered prayers to ease a dying soldier's passage. But Marin had also been cruel in her own way, quick with a slap when Arya moved too slowly, sharp with her tongue when the girl dared to question why she was never allowed beyond the cottage walls after dark, why she was forbidden from attending the village gatherings, why the mark on her inner wrist, a faint crescent moon surrounded by thorns, had to remain hidden beneath bandages at all times. Arya had obeyed. She had always obeyed, because obedience meant survival, and survival was all she had. But now Marin was dead. The fire had come 3 nights ago, sudden and consuming, tearing through the thatched roof with a hunger that felt almost sentient. Arya had been in the village square at the time, delivering a poultice to the blacksmith's wife, and by the time she returned, the cottage was nothing but embers and the smell of burnt flesh. The villagers had gathered, not to help, but to watch. Some had whispered that it was justice. Others had murmured that Marin had been dabbling in forbidden arts, that the gods had punished her for harboring an Omega child with strange eyes and stranger blood. No one had asked if Arya was safe. No one had offered shelter. She had spent the night since then curled beneath a merchant's cart, shivering against the cold, waiting for the village council to decide her fate. And this morning, they had. The elder had stood before the gathered crowd, his voice booming across the square, declaring that the healer's apprentice was no longer welcome within the village walls. She was to be sent north, to the labor camps that served the Empire's endless war machine, where Omegas without family or coin were ground into dust beneath the weight of stone and steel. It was a death sentence dressed in bureaucracy, and everyone knew it. Arya had not cried. She had learned long ago that tears changed nothing. Now, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to prick the darkening sky, she gathered what little remained: a scorched leather satchel, a handful of dried herbs that had survived the blaze, a small knife Marin had given her years ago, its blade chipped but still sharp enough to cut thread or skin, and the bandage around her wrist, which she rewrapped carefully, hiding the mark that burned faintly beneath the fabric. A heat that had been growing stronger with each passing day, though she did not understand why. The guards would come for her at dawn. She had until then to decide whether she would go quietly or run. The Northern Empire was a land of iron and ice, where the sun barely rose in winter and the wind carried the screams of wolves from the mountains. It was a place built on the bones of those who had tried and failed to carve out a life from frozen soil, where the strong devoured the weak and the powerful, crushed anyone foolish enough to challenge their rule. The capital, a sprawling fortress city called Greythane, was said to be ruled by a council of warlords who answered only to the distant emperor, a man no one had seen in decades, if he even existed at all. Arya had never been to Greythane. She had never been beyond the village borders, but she had heard the stories. Every Omega had. Stories of the labor camps where Omegas were worked until their bodies gave out, where disobedience was met with the lash, where the lucky ones died quickly and the unlucky ones lived just long enough to regret it. Stories of the breeding houses, where omegas were chained and sold to the highest bidder, their bodies used until they were no longer useful. Stories of the deep mines, where the air was so thick with dust that you drowned in it, where the darkness swallowed you whole and never let you go. She would not survive any of those places. She knew that, but running was no safer. The wilderness beyond the village was filled with beasts that hunted by scent, with bandits who would slit her throat for the clothes on her back, with cold that could freeze the breath in her lungs before she made it a mile. And even if she survived the wilderness, where would she go? The Northern Empire stretched for hundreds of miles in every direction, and beyond its borders lay territories even more hostile. The Southern Dominion, where omegas were treated as little more than livestock, and the Lycian Dominion, ruled by the Alpha King himself, a man whose name was spoken in whispers and whose reputation for ruthlessness was matched only by his power. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. And yet, as Arya sat in the ruins of the only home she had ever known, something inside her, some stubborn, foolish part of her that had refused to break despite everything, whispered that she had to try. The mark on her wrist flared with heat, and she hissed, pressing her palm against it. The pain was sharp, searing, as if something beneath her skin was trying to claw its way out. She pulled the bandage back, just enough to see the crescent moon glowing faintly in the dim light, the thorns around it seeming to pulse with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Maren had told her once, in a rare moment of something almost resembling kindness, that the mark was a curse, that it marked her as something the world would never accept, something that would bring nothing but suffering. Arya had believed her. She had spent her entire life hiding it, terrified of what would happen if anyone saw, if anyone knew. But now, with nothing left to lose, she wondered if Maren had been wrong. She wondered if the mark was not a curse, but a key. The village of Ashford was small, barely more than a cluster of wooden huts and a single stone well, but it had a cruelty that rivaled the grandest cities. The people here survived by turning a blind eye to injustice, by keeping their heads down and their mouths shut, by offering up the weakest among them whenever the Empire's collectors came calling. And they had offered Arya up without hesitation. She moved through the darkened streets now, her footsteps silent on the packed dirt, keeping to the shadows as she made her way toward the northern gate. The guards would be stationed there, waiting for dawn, but they would be drunk by now. They always were. If she was careful, if she was quiet, she might be able to slip past them before they noticed. She had almost reached the gate when a hand clamped down on her shoulder. Arya spun, her heart hammering, and found herself face to face with the blacksmith's son, a beta named Garen who had always looked at her with a mixture of pity and contempt. He was broad-shouldered and thick-armed, his face flushed with ale, and his grip on her shoulder was painfully tight. "Where do you think you're going, Omega?" he slurred, his breath reeking of cheap wine. Arya said nothing. She had learned long ago that speaking only made things worse. Garen's eyes narrowed. "You think you can just run? After everything this village has done for you? After we fed you, sheltered you, kept you alive when you should have been left to die in the gutter?" "Let me go," Arya said quietly, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Garen laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Let you go? You're property now, girl. The council sold your contract to the labor camps. You belong to the Empire." He leaned closer, his lips curling into a sneer. "But maybe, if you're nice to me, I'll put in a good word. Maybe they'll assign you to the breeding house instead. At least there, you'd be warm." Arya's hand moved before she could think, her fingers closing around the hilt of the knife at her belt. She pulled it free and pressed the blade against Garen's throat, her amber eyes blazing. "Let me go." For a moment, Garen froze, his eyes wide with shock. Then his expression twisted into rage, and he shoved her hard, sending her sprawling to the ground. The knife clattered from her hand, skittering across the dirt, and Garen loomed over her, his fist raised. "You little—" The blow never landed. A low, rumbling growl echoed through the night, and Garen stumbled back, his face going pale. Arya scrambled to her feet, her breath coming in ragged gasps, and turned toward the sound. Standing at the edge of the village, half hidden in shadow, was a wolf. But it was not like the wolves that prowled the mountains. This one was massive, easily twice the size of any natural beast, its fur a deep black that seemed to absorb the moonlight. Its eyes glowed a faint silver, and when it stepped forward, the ground seemed to tremble beneath its paws. Garen let out a strangled cry and fled, his footsteps pounding away into the night. Arya stood frozen, her heart racing as the wolf approached. It moved with a grace that was almost unnatural, its gaze fixed on her, and for a moment, she was certain it would tear her apart. But then it stopped, just a few feet away, and lowered its head, and the mark on Arya's wrist began to burn. She gasped, clutching her arm, and the wolf's ears flicked forward. It took another step closer, and Arya could see something glinting at its throat. A collar, silver and etched with runes she did not recognize. This was no wild beast. This was something else. The wolf stared at her for a long moment, and then, without warning, it turned and vanished into the darkness, leaving Arya alone in the empty street, her mark still burning, her mind reeling with questions she had no answers for. She did not sleep that night. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Arya was already gone. She had taken nothing but the clothes on her back, the knife, and the satchel of herbs. The village gates had been left unguarded, whether because of the wolf or because Garen had been too frightened to return, she did not know. And she had slipped through without incident, her feet carrying her north along the narrow dirt road that led toward the heart of the Empire. She did not know where she was going. She did not have a plan. But the mark on her wrist had stopped burning, and in its place was a faint pull, a whisper at the edge of her consciousness that seemed to urge her forward. So she walked. The road wound through a dense forest, the trees towering overhead and blocking out most of the sunlight. The air was cold and damp, and Arya wrapped her arms around herself, shivering. She had no cloak, no blanket, nothing to protect her from the elements. If she did not find shelter soon, the cold would kill her long before the Empire's guards ever could. She walked for hours, her feet blistering, her stomach gnawing with hunger. The forest was silent save for the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant cry of a bird. She saw no other travelers, no sign of civilization, just trees and shadows and the endless oppressive quiet. And then, as the sun began to set once more, she heard it. Voices. Arya froze, her heart leaping into her throat, and pressed herself against the trunk of a massive oak. She could see them now, through the trees. A group of soldiers, maybe a dozen in all, their armor bearing the insignia of the Northern Empire. They were dragging something behind them, a heavy cart laden with supplies, and at the rear of the group, bound in chains, was a boy. He looked to be around her age, maybe a year or two older, with hair the same silver blonde as hers and eyes that glowed faintly amber even in the fading light. He was thin, his clothes ragged and stained with blood, and the chains around his wrists and ankles rattled with every step he took. An Omega. Arya's breath caught. She had never seen another Omega before. Maren had told her they were rare, especially in the north, where most were either killed at birth or sold into servitude before they were old enough to remember. But this boy, this Omega, was alive, and he was staring directly at her. Their eyes met, and for a single, impossible moment, Arya felt something shift inside her. A recognition, a connection, as if she were looking into a mirror and seeing not herself, but something that had been missing her entire life. The boy's lips parted, as if he were about to speak, but then one of the soldiers barked an order, and he was yanked forward, stumbling, and the moment was broken. Arya watched, frozen, as the group disappeared into the trees, the sound of their voices fading into the distance, and the mark on her wrist began to burn again. Somewhere, hundreds of miles to the south, in a war camp built on blood and desperation, Kale woke to the same burning sensation on his own wrist, and knew, with a certainty that terrified him, that everything was about to change. And in the heart of the Lycian Dominion, in a throne room carved from black stone and lit by 1,000 candles, King Thorian pressed a hand to his chest and felt the twin marks flare to life beneath his skin, and for the first time in 28 years, He wondered if fate had not abandoned him after all. Cale had learned to sleep with one eye open long before he understood why. The war camp was a place where weakness invited death, where the strong preyed on the vulnerable, and where Omegas like him were considered less than human, tools to be used, broken, and discarded when they no longer served a purpose. He had been brought here when he was barely old enough to walk, sold by whoever had birthed him to a mercenary captain who saw profit in young flesh and desperate labor. He was 18 now, though he felt decades older. His body was lean and hard from years of manual labor, his hands calloused and scarred from hauling weapons, digging trenches, and performing whatever menial tasks the soldiers deemed beneath them. His hair, silver blonde and too long because no one cared enough to cut it, hung in his eyes that glowed amber in the firelight and marked him as different, as other, as something to be feared and despised in equal measure. The camp sprawled across a desolate valley in the southern Dominion, a temporary city of tents and wooden palisades that housed nearly 3,000 soldiers, all of them preparing for a war that seemed to have no end. The soldiers were brutal men, hardened by violence and numbed by the constant proximity to death. They treated the Omega servants with casual cruelty, as if inflicting pain were as natural as breathing. Kyle had learned early that survival meant invisibility. He kept his head down, his mouth shut, and his movements efficient. He never looked the soldiers in the eye, never spoke unless spoken to, never gave them any reason to remember his name. And when they hurt him, when they beat him for spilling water or kicked him for moving too slowly or worse, he endured it in silence because screaming only made them enjoy it more. He had no friends here. The other Omega servants were too broken or too terrified to form attachments, and the soldiers saw him as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. He had no family, no memories of a life before the camp, nothing but the faint, nagging sensation that something was missing, that there was a part of him he had never known. And then there was the mark. It had appeared on his inner wrist when he was 12, a crescent moon surrounded by thorns that glowed faintly in the dark. The first time the camp's healer had seen it, she had gone pale and ordered him to keep it hidden at all times. She had wrapped his wrist in leather bindings and warned him that if anyone discovered the mark, they would either kill him or sell him to someone far worse than the mercenaries. Kyle had obeyed. He always obeyed, because obedience meant survival. But 3 days ago, the mark had begun to burn. It started as a faint warmth, barely noticeable, but it had grown steadily worse with each passing hour. Now it felt like a brand pressed against his skin, a searing heat that made it difficult to focus, to sleep, to think of anything but the strange pull that seemed to tug at his chest, urging him toward something he could not name. He had tried to ignore it. He had wrapped the bindings tighter, buried himself in work, done everything he could to push the sensation away. But tonight, as he lay on the cold ground in the corner of the supply tent where he slept, the burning became unbearable. Kyle sat up, gasping, and tore at the leather bindings with trembling fingers. The moment the mark was exposed, it flared to life, glowing so brightly that it cast shadows across the tent walls. The pain was excruciating, a white-hot agony that made his vision blur and his breath come in ragged gasps. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the pain stopped. Cale stared down at his wrist, his heart pounding. The mark was still glowing, but the heat had faded, replaced by a strange, almost electric sensation that raced along his nerves and settled in his chest. He felt connected to something, to someone. Before he could process what was happening, the tent flap was thrown open, and Captain Darius stepped inside. Darius was a massive alpha, broad-shouldered and scarred, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and eyes that held no warmth, no mercy. He commanded the mercenary company with an iron fist, and his word was law within the camp. He had never paid Cale much attention before. The Omega was too insignificant, too easily replaced. But now, as his gaze fell on the glowing mark, his expression shifted into something sharp and predatory. "What the hell is that?" Darius demanded, crossing the tent in 2 long strides. Cale scrambled backward, his pulse racing, but there was nowhere to go. Darius grabbed his wrist, yanking it into the light, and his eyes widened. "A mate mark," Darius breathed. "You've got a goddamned mate mark." Cale's blood ran cold. He had heard of mate marks, of course. Everyone had. They were the stuff of legends, the physical manifestation of a bond between an alpha and their destined omega, a connection so powerful that it transcended logic and reason. But mate marks were rare, vanishingly so, and they were said to appear only when the bond was activated, when alpha and omega were within a certain distance of each other, which meant that somewhere, out there, Cale's fated mate was close. Darius's grip tightened, and Cale bit back a cry of pain. "Do you have any idea what this means, boy?" the captain growled. "Whoever your mate is, they're powerful. Marks this strong don't appear for just anyone. This," he shook Kyle's wrist, making the mark flare brighter. "This is worth a fortune." Kyle's stomach twisted. He knew what Darius was thinking. Fated mates were valuable, especially omega mates bonded to powerful alphas. If Darius could find Cale's mate and broker a deal, he could sell the omega for an obscene amount of gold. Or worse, he could use Cale as leverage, a hostage to control the alpha. "Please," Cale whispered, the word slipping out before he could stop it. "Please don't." Darius backhanded him across the face, and Cale's head snapped to the side, his vision swimming. "Shut up," the captain snarled. "You don't get to beg. You're property, and I'll do with you as I damn well please." He released Cale's wrist and turned toward the tent entrance, shouting for his lieutenants. Within minutes, the tent was filled with soldiers, all of them staring at Cale with a mixture of greed and suspicion. "Bind him," Darius ordered, "and double the guard. I want him watched at all times. If his mate comes looking for him, I want to know the second they set foot in this camp." 2 soldiers hauled Cale to his feet and clamped iron shackles around his wrists and ankles. The metal was cold and heavy, biting into his skin, and the chains that connected them were barely long enough to allow him to walk. They dragged him out of the supply tent and across the camp to a small, windowless shed that was used to store tools and weapons. The interior was cramped and filthy, reeking of rust and old blood, and the only light came from the narrow gap beneath the door. They shoved him inside, and Kyle stumbled, falling to his knees on the hard-packed dirt floor. The door slammed shut behind him, and he heard the heavy thud of a bar being dropped into place. He was alone. Kyle pulled himself into a sitting position, his back against the rough wooden wall, and stared down at the mark on his wrist. It was still glowing faintly, pulsing in time with his heartbeat, and he could still feel that strange pull, that sense of connection to something, someone, beyond the walls of his prison. He did not know who his mate was. He did not know if they were kind or cruel, if they would come for him or abandon him to his fate. But he knew, with a certainty that terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure, that his life was about to change. And he did not know if he would survive it. The hours passed slowly. Cale dozed fitfully, waking every time he heard footsteps outside the shed or the sound of voices raised in argument. The soldiers were on edge, he could tell. They were afraid of what his mate Mark might mean, afraid of who might come looking for him. And they should be afraid, because Cale could feel it now, growing stronger with each passing moment. The presence of his mate, drawing closer, like a storm gathering on the horizon. By the time dawn broke, the pull had become almost unbearable. Cale pressed his forehead against the wall, his breath coming in shallow gasps, and tried to focus on anything other than the overwhelming need to move, to run, to find the person the mark was calling him toward. And then the screaming started. It came from the northern edge of the camp, a chorus of panicked shouts and the clash of steel on steel. Cale's head snapped up, his heart racing, and he scrambled to the door, pressing his ear against the wood. "Attack!" someone was shouting. "We're under attack!" "How many?" "I don't know. They came out of nowhere." "Where's the captain? Someone find Captain Darius!" The sounds of battle grew louder, closer, and Cale felt the mark on his wrist flare with heat. He did not know what was happening, but he knew instinctively that it was connected to him. His mate was here. The door to the shed suddenly exploded inward, the wood splintering as if it had been struck by a battering ram. Kale threw himself backward, shielding his face from the flying debris, and when he looked up, he saw a figure silhouetted in the doorway. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, clad in black armor that seemed to absorb the morning light. His face was obscured by a helmet, but Kale could see his eyes, silver like molten metal, and glowing with an intensity that made Kale's breath catch. The man stepped into the shed, and the air seemed to thicken, charged with a power that made Kale's skin prickle. He moved with a predator's grace, his gaze sweeping over the cramped space before settling on Kale. For a moment, neither of them moved, and then the man spoke, his voice low and rough, like gravel grinding underfoot. "You." Kyle's pulse hammered in his ears. He tried to speak, to ask who this man was, what he wanted, but the words died in his throat. The man crossed the shed in 2 strides and dropped to one knee in front of Kale, his silver eyes locked on the Omega's face. Slowly, deliberately, he reached out and took Kale's wrist, turning it so the mark was visible. The moment their skin touched, Kale felt it, a jolt of electricity that raced through his entire body, so intense it was almost painful. The mark on his wrist blazed with light, and he saw, for the first time, a matching mark on the man's chest, glowing through the gaps in his armor. A mate mark. "Mine," the man growled, and the word was not a question. Kale's breath hitched. He did not know what to say, how to respond. This man, this alpha, was his mate. The bond that connected them was undeniable, a force of nature that could not be broken or ignored. But Kale did not know him, did not trust him. "Who are you?" Kale managed to whisper. The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, Kyle thought he would not answer. Then he reached up and removed his helmet, revealing a face that was hard and angular, with sharp cheekbones and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from stone. His hair was dark, almost black, and his expression was unreadable. "Thorian," the man said, "King of the Lycian Dominion." Kale's blood turned to ice. The Alpha King, the most powerful alpha in existence. A man whose name was spoken in whispers, whose reputation for ruthlessness was matched only by his strength. A man who commanded armies, who ruled over a kingdom that spanned half the known world, who had never taken a mate because fate, it was said, had denied him one. And he was here, for Kale. "You're coming with me," Thorian said, his tone brooking no argument. He produced a key from his belt and unlocked the shackles around Kale's wrists and ankles, the iron clattering to the ground. Kale rubbed his wrists, his mind racing. He should run. He should fight. But the bond was already pulling at him, urging him toward this man, toward his mate. And he knew, deep down, that running would be pointless. Thorian stood and offered Kale his hand. Kale stared at it for a long moment, his heart pounding. And then, slowly, he took it. The Alpha King pulled him to his feet, and together they stepped out of the shed and into the chaos of the burning camp. Soldiers lay scattered across the ground, some dead, others groaning in pain. The tents were ablaze, and the air was thick with smoke. And standing at the center of it all, surrounded by a dozen of Thorian's warriors, was Captain Darius, his face twisted with rage. "You!" Darius snarled, pointing at Thorian. "You think you can just waltz into my camp and take what's mine?" Thorian's expression did not change. "He was never yours. He's property. I paid for him. Then consider this a repossession." Thorian's voice was cold, devoid of emotion. "You will not touch him again." Darius's hand went to the sword at his belt, but before he could draw it, one of Thorian's warriors stepped forward and drove a blade through his chest. The captain's eyes went wide, and he fell to his knees, blood pouring from the wound. Kale watched, numb, as Darius collapsed face first into the dirt. Thorian turned to Kale, his silver eyes searching the Omega's face. "Can you walk?" Kale nodded, though his legs felt unsteady. "Good. We leave now." The journey back to the Lycian Dominion took 3 days. Thorian's warriors moved swiftly and efficiently, cutting through the wilderness with the ease of men who had spent their lives on campaign. Kale rode in silence, seated behind Thorian on the king's massive warhorse, his arms wrapped around the Alpha's waist to keep from falling. He did not speak. He did not know what to say. Thorian did not press him. The king was silent as well, his focus on the road ahead, though Kale could feel the tension in his shoulders, the barely restrained power that seemed to radiate from him like heat from a forge. At night, they made camp in clearings or abandoned ruins, and Thorian always ensured that Kale was fed and given a place to sleep. He did not touch the Omega beyond what was necessary, did not make any demands or expectations clear. He simply watched, as if he were trying to solve a puzzle he did not yet understand, and Kyle watched him in return. The Alpha King was not what he had expected. He had imagined a tyrant, a monster, someone who would claim him and use him without thought or care. But Thorian was controlled, deliberate, almost gentle in the way he handled Kyle, as if the Omega were something fragile that might break. It unnerved him more than cruelty would have. On the third night, as they camped beneath the stars, Kale finally found the courage to speak. "Why did you come for me?" Thorian, who had been tending to the fire, looked up. His silver eyes glowed in the firelight, and for a moment, he did not answer. Then he said simply, "Because you're mine." "But you didn't know I existed." "No," Thorian admitted. "I didn't. But when the mark appeared, I knew I had to find you." Kyle frowned. "The mark appeared? When?" "3 days ago. The same time Kyle's had started burning." "I don't understand," Kyle said quietly. "Mate marks are supposed to appear when you meet your fated mate, not before." Thorian's jaw tightened. "I know. Then why—" "I don't have all the answers," Thorian interrupted, his voice sharper than before. He took a breath, visibly reining himself in, and when he spoke again, his tone was calmer. "But I intend to find them, and you're going to help me." Kyle stared at him, uncertain whether to be afraid or relieved. In the end, he settled for silence, and as the fire crackled and the stars wheeled overhead, the mark on his wrist pulsed faintly, reminding him that his fate was no longer his own. Somewhere, far to the north, Arya felt the same pulse and knew that she was running out of time. Arya had been walking for 5 days when she finally collapsed. Her feet were torn and bleeding, her body trembling with exhaustion and hunger, and the forest around her had become a blur of trees and shadows that all looked the same. She had run out of water 2 days ago, and the herbs in her satchel were long gone, consumed in small, desperate portions that did nothing to ease the gnawing emptiness in her stomach. She had seen no one since leaving the village. No travelers, no soldiers, no signs of civilization. Just the endless, oppressive silence of the wilderness and the constant, maddening pull of the mark on her wrist, urging her forward, deeper into the unknown. She did not know where she was going. She only knew that she could not stop. But now, as she lay on the cold ground, her vision darkening at the edges, she realized that her body had finally reached its limit. She was going to die here, alone, forgotten. Just another Omega lost to the wilderness. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, she felt only a strange, numb acceptance. Perhaps this was better than the labor camps. Perhaps this was the mercy the gods had denied her all her life. She closed her eyes and waited for the darkness to take her. And then she heard the footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, crunching through the underbrush with a weight that suggested something large and dangerous. Arya's eyes snapped open, her heart racing, and she tried to push herself upright, but her arms gave out beneath her. The footsteps stopped. Arya turned her head, her breath catching, and found herself staring at a figure cloaked in black, their face hidden beneath a deep hood. They stood at the edge of the clearing, motionless, as if waiting for something. "Please," Arya whispered, her voice hoarse and broken. "Please, help me." The figure did not move. Arya's vision blurred with tears. "Please, I don't want to die here." For a long moment, there was only silence, and then the figure stepped forward, and Arya saw their hand, slender, pale, with long fingers that ended in sharp nails. They knelt beside her, and when they spoke, their voice was soft and musical, almost hypnotic. "You are marked." Arya blinked, confused. "What?" The figure reached out and gently took Arya's wrist, turning it so the crescent moon mark was visible. The moment their skin touched, the mark flared with light, and Arya gasped, the pain sharp and sudden. "Interesting," the figure murmured. "Very interesting. Who are you?" Arya managed to ask. The figure tilted their head, and though Arya could not see their face, she had the distinct impression that they were smiling. "A friend," they said. "Or an enemy. That depends entirely on you." Before Arya could respond, the figure scooped her up with surprising ease, cradling her against their chest as if she weighed nothing. Arya tried to struggle, to protest, but her body refused to obey, and within moments, the darkness claimed her. When Arya woke, she was warm. It was such a foreign sensation that for a moment, she thought she was dreaming. But as her eyes adjusted to the dim light, she realized she was lying on a soft bed, covered in thick furs, in a room that was small but well-appointed. A fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the stone walls, and the air smelled of herbs and something sweet, like honey. She sat up slowly, her head spinning, and looked around. The room appeared to be part of a larger structure, perhaps a cottage or a small manor. There were shelves lined with books and jars filled with strange liquids, a wooden table cluttered with alchemical equipment, and a single narrow window that looked out onto a dense forest. And seated in a chair by the fire, watching her with eyes that glowed faintly gold in the firelight, was the figure who had found her. They had removed their cloak, revealing a woman who looked to be in her 30s with pale skin, dark hair that fell in waves to her waist, and features that were sharp and elegant. She wore a simple black dress, and around her neck hung a silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. "You're awake," the woman said, her voice as soft and musical as Arya remembered. "Good. I was beginning to worry." Arya's throat was dry, and when she tried to speak, the words came out as a croak. The woman rose gracefully and poured a cup of water from a pitcher on the table, handing it to Arya. Arya drank greedily, the cool liquid soothing her parched throat, and when the cup was empty, she set it aside and looked at the woman with wary eyes. "Who are you?" she asked. The woman smiled. "My name is Alara. I am a scholar of sorts. I study the old magics, the forgotten lore, the things that most people would rather pretend do not exist. Why did you help me?" Alara's smile widened. "Because you are interesting, little Omega. Very interesting indeed." Arya frowned. "I don't understand." Alara sat back down in her chair and steepled her fingers, regarding Arya with an expression that was equal parts curiosity and calculation. "Tell me, child, what do you know about mate marks?" Arya's hand instinctively went to her wrist, where the mark was still hidden beneath the bandage. I know they're rare, that they appear when an Omega meets their fated Alpha." "True," Alara said, "but incomplete. Mate marks are more than just symbols of a bond. They are conduits of power, ties that connect two souls across distance and time. And yours," she leaned forward, her golden eyes gleaming, "yours is unusual. How?" "Because it is not alone." Arya's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Alara stood and crossed to the window, gazing out at the forest. "There is another mark, identical to yours, burning somewhere far from here. I felt it the moment it awakened, a pulse of energy so strong it could not be ignored. And I felt yours as well, calling out to its twin." Arya's mind reeled. "A twin? But that's impossible. Mate marks are unique. Each bond is unique, yes," Alara interrupted. "But you, my dear, are not bound to one alpha. You are bound to two." The words hung in the air, heavy and impossible. Arya shook her head. "No, that can't be right. I've never even met an alpha. I've been locked in a village my whole life. And yet the mark burns, does it not?" Alara turned to face her, her expression serious. "The bond does not require proximity to activate. It requires resonance, a meeting of souls, even across great distances. And something has awakened your bond, just as it has awakened the bond of your twin." Arya's breath came in short, shallow gasps. "I don't have a twin." "Are you certain?" Arya opened her mouth to say yes, to insist that she was alone, that she had always been alone. But the words would not come, because deep down, in a place she had never dared to examine, there was a part of her that had always felt incomplete, as if something essential was missing. "I don't know," she whispered. Alara nodded, as if this was the answer she had expected. "Then let me tell you what I do know. 18 years ago, a pair of Omega twins was born to a noble family in the Eastern Territories. The birth was kept secret, hidden from the world, because twins are considered sacred and dangerous. The nobles believed that the twins would bring either great fortune or great ruin, and they could not agree on which. So they made a choice. They separated the twins, selling one to the Northern Empire and the other to the Southern Dominion, ensuring that the two would never meet, never know of each other's existence." Arya's hands trembled. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I believe you are one of those twins," Alara said simply. "And I believe your brother is the other." The room seemed to tilt, and Arya gripped the edge of the bed to steady herself. A brother, a twin, someone who shared her blood, her face, her mark. It was too much, too impossible. "Even if that's true," Arya said, her voice shaking, "what does it have to do with the mate marks?" Alara's expression darkened. "That is the question, isn't it? Mate marks are supposed to form between one alpha and one omega, but yours formed between two omegas and a single alpha, which means that the bond you share is not natural. It is artificial, engineered. By who? I do not know," Alara admitted. "But I suspect it has something to do with the separation. Someone wanted to ensure that the twins remained apart, and they used the mate bond as a leash, tying you both to an alpha who could control you, manipulate you, keep you from ever finding each other." Arya felt sick. Why would anyone do that? "Power," Alara said. "Twins are rare, and Omega twins even more so. If they were to reunite, their combined strength could be significant. Enough to threaten kingdoms, to shift the balance of power. Someone wanted to prevent that, and they succeeded. Until now." Arya stared at her, her mind racing. "What changed?" "You did," Alara said. "Or rather, your bond did. Something triggered the mate marks to awaken, something strong enough to override whatever magic was keeping them dormant. And now, both you and your twin are being drawn toward your fated alpha, whether you want to be or not." Arya's wrist throbbed, and she pressed her hand against it, feeling the heat beneath her skin. "Who is he? The alpha?" Alara's lips curved into a faint smile. "I think you already know." And Arya did. Because there was only one alpha powerful enough to have two mates, only one man whose name carried enough weight to make the world tremble. "Thorian," she whispered. Alara nodded. "The Alpha King." Arya's pulse hammered in her ears. She had heard the stories, of course. Everyone had. The Alpha King was a legend, a figure of awe and terror, a man who had never taken a mate because fate had supposedly denied him one. But if Alara was right, then fate had not denied him. Fate had given him two, and one of them was Arya. "What do I do?" Arya asked, her voice small. Alara studied her for a long moment, her golden eyes unreadable. Then she said, "That depends. Do you want to be a pawn in someone else's game, or do you want to take control of your own destiny?" Arya met her gaze, and despite the fear coiling in her chest, she felt a spark of something else. Something fierce and defiant. "I want to be free," she said. Alara's smile widened. "Then you have much to learn, little Omega, and very little time to learn it." Over the next 3 days, Alara taught Arya everything she knew about mate bonds, about the old magics that governed them, about the ways they could be manipulated, controlled, and broken. She taught Arya how to shield her mind from the bond's pull, how to resist the overwhelming need to submit to her alpha, how to fight back against the instincts that had been bred into her from birth. It was exhausting, painful work. The bond resisted every attempt to suppress it, flooding Arya with waves of longing and need that left her gasping and trembling. But Alara was relentless, pushing her past her limits, forcing her to build walls around her mind and heart. "The bond is a tool," Alara said as they sat by the fire on the third night, Arya's hands shaking from the effort of maintaining her mental shields. "It can be used to control you, to manipulate you, to make you believe that you have no choice but to obey. But it can also be used by you, if you are strong enough. If you are clever enough. How? Arya asked, her voice hoarse. Alara leaned forward, her eyes glinting. By turning it against those who seek to control you. By using the bond to manipulate your alpha, to make him see you not as a possession, but as an equal. And by finding your twin. Because together, you will be far more powerful than you ever could be apart. Arya's breath hitched. You think I should go to him? To Thorian? I think you have no choice, Alara said. The bond will not allow you to stay away forever. It will pull at you, wear you down, until you are too weak to resist. Better to go on your own terms, with your mind intact and your will unbroken. Arya stared into the fire, her thoughts a tangled mess. She did not want to go to the Alpha King. She did not want to be claimed, bonded, tied to a man she did not know and could not trust. But Alara was right. The bond was growing stronger with each passing day, and soon it would be too powerful to resist. What about my twin? Arya asked quietly. What if he doesn't want to be found? Alara's expression softened. Then you will have to convince him, because if the two of you remain separated, you will both be vulnerable, and those who seek to control you will stop at nothing to keep you apart. Arya nodded slowly, her resolve hardening. She did not know what lay ahead. She did not know if she would survive the journey to the Lycian Dominion, or what she would find when she got there. But she knew she could not stay here, hiding in the forest, waiting for the bond to consume her. She had to move forward. She had to find her twin, and she had to face the Alpha King. On the morning of the fourth day, Alara gave Arya a pack filled with supplies: food, water, a warm cloak, and a small vial of liquid that glowed faintly silver. What is this? Arya asked, holding up the vial. A suppressant, Alara said. It will dull the bond's effects for a short time, give you a chance to think clearly when you need it most. But use it sparingly. Too much, and it will damage the bond permanently. Arya tucked the vial carefully into the pack and slung it over her shoulder. Thank you. For everything. Alara inclined her head. Do not thank me yet, little Omega. The road ahead is long and dangerous, and there are forces at work that even I do not fully understand. But if you survive, if you find your twin and claim your power, then perhaps you will have the strength to break the chains that bind you. Arya took a deep breath and stepped out into the forest, the morning sun filtering through the trees, casting long shadows across the path ahead. She did not look back. The journey to the Lycian Dominion took 2 weeks. Arya traveled mostly at night, avoiding the main roads and keeping to the forest paths where she was less likely to be seen. She rationed her supplies carefully, hunting small game when she could, and foraging for edible plants to supplement the meager rations Alara had provided. The bond was a constant presence, a low hum at the back of her mind that grew louder with each passing day. She used the suppressant sparingly, only when the pull became unbearable, and each time she did, she felt a pang of guilt, as if she were betraying something fundamental. But she pushed the guilt aside and focused on surviving. She crossed rivers swollen with spring melt, climbed rocky hillsides that left her hands scraped and bleeding, and navigated dense thickets that tore at her clothes and skin. She slept in hollow trees and shallow caves, always alert, always listening for the sound of pursuit. And slowly, the landscape began to change. The forests of the Northern Empire gave way to rolling plains and jagged mountains, and in the distance, she could see the towering spires of the Lycian capital, a city built of black stone and iron that seemed to rise from the earth like a monument to power. Arya's heart pounded as she stood on a hillside overlooking the city, the wind whipping her hair around her face. This was it, the seat of the Alpha King's power, the place where her twin was being held, the place where her fate would be decided. She took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and began the descent. The city gates were heavily guarded, manned by soldiers in black armor who scrutinized every person who entered. Arya pulled her hood low over her face and joined the line of travelers waiting to be admitted, her heart racing. When it was her turn, a guard stepped forward and demanded to see her papers. "I don't have any," Arya said quietly. The guard's eyes narrowed. "Then you're not getting in." Arya hesitated, her mind racing. She could not afford to be turned away, not when she was this close. But she also could not reveal her identity, could not let anyone know who she was or why she was here. And then the mark on her wrist flared with heat, and she made a decision. She pulled back her sleeve, exposing the glowing crescent moon. The guard's eyes went wide, and he stepped back, his hand going to the hilt of his sword. "What the— I need to see the king," Arya said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. "Tell him his mate has arrived." For a moment, the guard simply stared at her, his expression a mixture of shock and disbelief. And then he turned and ran. Within minutes, the gates were swarming with soldiers, and Arya found herself surrounded, her wrists bound in iron shackles, her body pressed against the cold stone wall. "Don't move," one of the soldiers barked. "The king will decide what to do with you." Arya did not resist. She simply stood there, her heart pounding, and waited. And deep within the palace, in a throne room carved from black stone, King Thorian felt the second mark on his chest flare to life, and he knew that everything was about to change. Again, Thorian stood at the center of the throne room, his hands clenched into fists, his mind reeling. 2 marks, 2 mates. It was impossible, unheard of. And yet, he could feel them both. The Omega he had claimed from the war camp, and the Omega who had just arrived at his gates, their presences burning like twin flames in his chest. Kale stood beside him, his amber eyes wide with shock. The boy had been in the palace for less than a week, and in that time, Thorian had learned very little about him. Kale was guarded, wary, refusing to speak unless directly questioned. And even then, his answers were clipped and evasive. But now, as the second mark flared to life, Kale's expression shifted into something raw and desperate. "She's here," Kale whispered. Thorian turned to him, his silver eyes sharp. "She? My twin," Kale said, his voice trembling. "I can feel her. She's here." Thorian's jaw tightened. He had suspected, after speaking with his advisors and scholars, that the twin marks might indicate a connection between 2 Omegas rather than a bond to him alone. But hearing it confirmed sent a cold fury racing through his veins. Someone had done this deliberately. Someone had engineered this bond, tied him to 2 Omegas who were connected to each other, and then separated them to ensure they could never unite. And Thorian was going to find out who. "Bring her to me," he ordered, his voice like iron. The guards bowed and hurried from the room, and Thorian turned to Kale, his expression hard. "Stay here," he said. Kale's eyes flashed. "No, I want to see her." "You will," Thorian said. "But not yet. Not until I know who she is and what she wants." Kale looked like he wanted to argue, but after a moment, he lowered his gaze and nodded. Thorian did not wait for a response. He strode from the throne room, his mind already turning over the possibilities, the threats, the dangers that this second Omega represented. And when the guards brought her before him, bound and defiant, her amber eyes blazing with a fire that matched Kale's, Thorian knew that his world had just become infinitely more complicated. "Who are you?" he demanded. The girl lifted her chin, and despite the chains, despite the fear he could scent rolling off her in waves, she met his gaze without flinching. "My name is Arya," she said, "and I'm here to find my brother." The throne room fell silent. Thorian stared at the girl before him, his mind racing through 1,000 calculations, 1,000 possibilities. She looked so much like Kale, it was almost painful. The same silver blonde hair, the same amber eyes, the same delicate bone structure that spoke of nobility despite the ragged clothes and dirt-streaked skin. But where Kale's gaze was guarded and wary, hers burned with defiance. A fierce determination that reminded Thorian of warriors he had faced on the battlefield. She was not broken. Not yet. And that made her dangerous. "Your brother," Thorian repeated, his voice low and controlled. "You claim to have a twin." "I don't claim it," Arya said, her chin still raised despite the chains binding her wrists. "I know it. I can feel him. He's here. In this palace." Thorian's jaw tightened. She was right, of course. But admitting that would give her leverage, and he could not afford to show weakness. Not when everything about this situation screamed conspiracy and manipulation. "How did you find this place?" he demanded. "The bond led me here," Arya said simply. "The same bond that brought my brother to you. And you expect me to believe that you walked hundreds of miles, alone and unprotected, following nothing but a feeling?" Arya's eyes flashed. "I don't care what you believe. I came here for my brother, not for you." One of the guards stepped forward, his hand going to his sword. "Watch your tongue, Omega. You're speaking to the Alpha King." Arya did not flinch. "I know who he is, and I know what he wants, but I won't be claimed like some prize to be won. I won't be controlled." Thorian held up a hand, stopping the guard before he could strike. He moved closer to Arya, his silver eyes locked on hers, and he could feel the bond humming between them, pulling at him with a force that was almost physical. She was his mate. There was no denying it. The mark on his chest burned with the same intensity as the one connected to Kale, and every instinct in his body screamed at him to reach out, to touch her, to claim her as his own. But he did not, because something about this was wrong. And Thorian had not survived 28 years as the most powerful alpha in existence by ignoring his instincts. "You say you came for your brother," Thorian said quietly, "but you also came because the bond compelled you. You couldn't stay away, could you?" Arya's jaw clenched, and for a moment he saw the mask slip, saw the fear and uncertainty beneath the defiance. "No," she admitted. "I couldn't." Thorian nodded slowly. "Then let me make something very clear. You are in my territory now, under my protection and my authority. Whatever you think you know about this bond, whatever you believe about your connection to your twin, it does not change the fact that you are mine. Both of you." "I belong to no one," Arya said, her voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. "You belong to fate," Thorian corrected. "As do I. And whether you accept it or not, we are bound. You, your brother, and me. 3 souls tied together by forces neither of us fully understand." Arya's breath hitched, and Thorian could see the conflict warring in her eyes, the need to fight, to resist, battling against the overwhelming pull of the bond. "I want to see him," she said finally. "I want to see Kale." Thorian studied her for a long moment, weighing his options. Keeping them separated would be the safer choice, would give him time to unravel the mystery of their connection and determine who was responsible for engineering this bond. But it would also breed resentment, and he needed their cooperation if he was going to uncover the truth. "Very well," he said, "but you will see him under guard, and you will answer my questions. All of them." Arya nodded, and Thorian gestured to the guards. "Remove the chains." The guards hesitated, clearly uncertain, but they obeyed. The moment the iron shackles fell away, Arya rubbed her wrists and took a shaky breath. Thorian turned and strode toward the private chamber adjacent to the throne room, knowing she would follow. The bond would not allow her to do otherwise. The chamber was smaller, more intimate, with a large table surrounded by chairs and a fireplace that crackled with warmth. Kale was already there, pacing like a caged animal, and the moment Arya stepped through the door, he froze. For a long moment, neither of them moved, and then Kale crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Arya into his arms. Arya gasped, her eyes wide with shock, but then she was hugging him back, her fingers clutching at his shirt, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't know," Kyle whispered, his voice breaking. "I didn't know you existed." "Neither did I," Arya said, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "But I felt you. All my life I felt like something was missing, and now you're here," Kyle finished, pulling back just enough to look at her face. "You're real," Arya laughed, a sound that was equal parts joy and disbelief. "So are you." Thorian watched them from the doorway, his expression unreadable. He had expected the reunion to be emotional, but he had not anticipated the sheer intensity of it. The way the two of them seemed to fit together like pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered for too long. And he had not anticipated the way it made his chest tighten, a feeling he did not have a name for. After a moment, he cleared his throat, and both twins turned to look at him, their expressions wary. "Sit," Thorian said. gesturing to the table. They obeyed, though Kale kept one hand on Arya's arm, as if afraid she might disappear if he let go. Thorian took a seat across from them and leaned back, his silver eyes moving between the two. "Tell me everything, from the beginning." Over the next hour, Arya and Kyle shared their stories, piecing together the fragments of their lives in a way that painted a picture of cruelty and manipulation. They had been separated at birth, sold to different territories, raised in ignorance of each other's existence. They had both been abused, exploited, treated as less than human because of what they were. And they had both awakened their mate marks at the exact same moment, 3 days before Thorian had felt his own marks appear. "Someone triggered the bond," Thorian said when they had finished. "Someone with knowledge of old magic, someone powerful enough to manipulate fate itself." "But why?" Arya asked. "What would anyone gain from tying us to you?" Thorian's expression darkened. "Control. If the bond can be controlled, then so can I. And if I can be controlled, then the Lycian Dominion falls." Kyle's eyes widened. "You think this is about a coup?" "I think this is about war," Thorian said. "The Northern Empire and the Southern Dominion have been circling each other for years, waiting for an excuse to strike. If they could weaken the Lycian Dominion, remove me from power, they could divide my territory between them and tip the balance of the continent in their favor." Arya frowned. "But how does separating us help them?" "Because together, you are a threat," Thorian said. "Twin Omegas are rare, and the bond between you is powerful. If you were to unite, if you were to claim your full strength, you could challenge even an Alpha King. But separated, you are vulnerable, easily controlled, easily manipulated." Kale's jaw tightened. "So they sold us, kept us apart, and then triggered the bond to draw us to you, hoping we'd be weak enough to be used as leverage." "Exactly," Thorian said. "But they made a mistake. They underestimated you. And they underestimated me." Arya leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "Then we find whoever did this and make them pay." Thorian's lips curved into a faint, dangerous smile. "My thoughts exactly." Over the next several days, Thorian threw the full weight of his resources into uncovering the conspiracy. His spies combed through the records of the Northern Empire and the Southern Dominion, searching for any mention of twin Omegas sold 18 years ago. His scholars pored over ancient texts, looking for information about engineered mate bonds and the magic required to create them. And his advisors worked tirelessly to identify anyone who might have the power, the knowledge, and the motive to orchestrate such a plan. Meanwhile, Arya and Kale remained in the palace, under constant guard, but otherwise free to move about as they pleased. Thorian had given them adjoining rooms in the East Wing, far from the main halls where the court gathered, and he had made it clear that anyone who harmed or harassed them would answer to him personally. The twins spent most of their time together, making up for the 18 years they had lost. They talked for hours, sharing stories and memories, laughing and crying in equal measure. And slowly, the bond between them grew stronger, more tangible, until Thorian could feel it even from a distance. A connection that hummed with power and potential. It should have reassured him. Instead, it made him uneasy. Because the stronger their bond became, the weaker his own connection to them seemed to grow. It was subtle at first, a faint dimming of the pull, a slight lessening of the heat in the marks on his chest. But as the days passed, it became more pronounced, until Thorian could barely feel the bond at all, unless he was in the same room as the twins. He did not tell them. He did not tell anyone. But he could not shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. On the 7th day, one of Thorian's spies returned with news. Thorian was in the council chamber when the man arrived, flanked by guards and looking pale and shaken. He bowed deeply and then straightened, his eyes darting nervously around the room. "Speak," Thorian commanded. The spy swallowed hard. "My lord, I have uncovered information about the twins, about their birth." Thorian leaned forward, his silver eyes sharp. "Go on." "They were born to a noble family in the Eastern Territories," the spy said. "House Virella. The family was once powerful, influential, but they fell from grace after a failed rebellion against the emperor. Most of the family was executed, but a few survived. including the lady of the house, who was pregnant at the time. And the twins? Thorian asked. They were born in secret, the spy said. The lady died in childbirth, and the infants were taken by a midwife who was paid to ensure they disappeared. She sold them to separate buyers, one to a healer in the Northern Empire, the other to a mercenary captain in the Southern Dominion. Thorian's jaw tightened. And the midwife? Is she still alive? The spy hesitated. No, my lord. She was found dead in her home 3 weeks ago. Murdered. A cold silence fell over the room. Convenient? Thorian said, his voice like ice. The spy nodded. There's more, my lord. I found records of a payment made to the midwife shortly before her death. A large sum, transferred from an account linked to the Northern Empire's intelligence network. Thorian's eyes narrowed. They're cleaning up loose ends. It would seem so, my lord. Thorian stood, his mind racing. The Northern Empire was involved, just as he had suspected. But this was more than just a conspiracy to weaken the Lycian Dominion. This was a deliberate, methodical plan to eliminate anyone who might reveal the truth about the twins' origins, which meant that Arya and Kale were in more danger than he had realized. Double the guard on the twins, Thorian ordered. No one enters their rooms without my explicit permission, and I want every member of the palace staff vetted. If there are spies among us, I want them found and dealt with. The spy bowed. Yes, my lord. Thorian dismissed him and turned to his advisors, his expression grim. We're running out of time. Whoever orchestrated this will not stop until the twins are dead or under their control. We need to move faster. One of the advisors, an elderly alpha named Corvin, cleared his throat. My lord, there is another possibility we have not yet considered. Thorian looked at him. What? The bond, Corvin said. If it was engineered, then it can be broken, or at least its effects can be mitigated. There are rituals, old magics, that could sever the connection between you and the twins. Thorian's expression darkened. I will not break the bond. But, my lord, I said no. Thorian snapped, his voice like thunder. The bond is the only thing keeping them alive. Without it, they are vulnerable, expendable. As long as they are tied to me, anyone who harms them harms the Lycian Dominion, and no one is foolish enough to risk that. Corvin bowed his head. Of course, my lord. Forgive me. Thorian took a breath, forcing himself to calm. Find another way. There has to be a way to expose the conspiracy without putting the twins at risk. The advisors murmured their agreement, and the meeting continued. But Thorian's mind was elsewhere. He could feel the bond fraying, weakening, and he did not know how to stop it. And he was beginning to suspect that the only way to save the twins was to lose them. That night, Thorian found himself standing outside Arya's room, his hand raised to knock, though he did not know why he had come. The door opened before he could, and Arya stood there, her amber eyes wide with surprise. Your Majesty, she said, inclining her head. Thorian, he corrected. We are bonded. You may use my name. Arya hesitated, then nodded. Thorian. Is something wrong? Thorian looked past her, into the room where Kale sat by the fire, and he felt the bond pulse faintly, a reminder of what connected them. I need to speak with you, he said. Both of you. Arya stepped aside, and Thorian entered, closing the door behind him. Kale stood as he approached, his expression wary. What is it? Thorian did not waste time with pleasantries. The bond is weakening. I can feel it. And I believe it is because your connection to each other is growing stronger. Arya and Kale exchanged a glance, and Thorian saw the guilt flash across their faces. We didn't mean... Arya began. It's not your fault, Thorian interrupted. The bond was never natural. It was engineered, manipulated, designed to serve someone else's purpose. And now, it is unraveling. What does that mean? Kale asked quietly. Thorian met his gaze. It means that if the bond breaks completely, I will have no claim to you, no ability to protect you, and whoever orchestrated this will move to eliminate you before you can become a threat. Arya's breath hitched. Then what do we do? Thorian was silent for a long moment, and then he said, We finish this. We find the people responsible, and we make sure they can never hurt you again. And if we can't? Kyle asked. Thorian's expression hardened. Then I will do whatever it takes to keep you safe, even if it means letting you go. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. And for the first time since the bond had awakened, Thorian felt the full weight of what it meant to be tied to two souls he could not control, could not protect, could not keep. The next morning, Thorian received word that one of his border outposts had been attacked. The report was brief but brutal. A force of unknown soldiers had swept through the outpost in the dead of night, killing everyone inside and burning the structures to the ground. There were no survivors, no witnesses, and no clear indication of who was responsible. But Thorian knew this was a message, a warning. The conspiracy was escalating. He joujidi his war council immediately, and within hours, the palace was a flurry of activity as soldiers prepared for mobilization, and scouts were dispatched to gather intelligence. Arya and Kale were brought to the council chamber, despite the protests of some of the advisors who believed the twins should be kept away from matters of war. Thorian silenced them with a single look. "They have a right to know," he said. "This war is being fought because of them." The twins sat at the table, their expressions somber, as Thorian laid out the situation. "The attack on the outpost was deliberate," he said. "It was designed to provoke a response, to draw our forces away from the capital. Whoever is behind this wants us distracted, vulnerable. So what do we do?" Arya asked. Thorian's eyes gleamed with cold determination. "We give them what they want. We mobilize our forces, make it look like we're taking the bait. But we leave a contingent here, hidden, ready to strike when they make their move." One of the generals frowned. "You think they'll attack the capital?" "I think they'll come for the twins," Thorian said. "And when they do, we'll be ready." The plan was set into motion with ruthless efficiency. Thorian's armies marched toward the border, making a show of force that could be seen for miles. But within the palace, a select group of warriors remained, concealed in the shadows, waiting. Arya and Kyle were moved to the most secure part of the palace, a fortified tower that could only be accessed through a single guarded entrance. Thorian himself stood watch, refusing to leave their side. The twins did not protest. They understood the danger, understood that their lives hung in the balance, and they trusted Thorian to protect them. For 3 days, nothing happened. And then, on the fourth night, the attack came. It started with a sound like thunder, a massive explosion that shook the entire palace. Arya woke to the sound of screaming, the smell of smoke, and the sight of Thorian standing by the window, his expression grim. "They're here," he said. Kale was already on his feet, his eyes wide with fear. "Who?" "The Northern Empire," Thorian said. "And they brought an army." Outside, the palace grounds were a battlefield. Soldiers in black armor clashed with invaders wearing the colors of the Northern Empire, and the air was filled with the sounds of steel on steel, the roar of flames, the cries of the dying. Thorian turned to the twins, his silver eyes blazing. "Stay here. Do not leave this room, no matter what you hear." "But," Arya began. "That's an order," Thorian said, his voice brooking no argument. And then he was gone, disappearing into the chaos, leaving Arya and Kale alone in the tower. They stood by the window, watching the battle unfold below, their hearts pounding. And then Arya felt it, a presence, cold and familiar, moving through the shadows. "Kyle," she whispered. He turned, and his eyes went wide. Standing in the doorway was a figure cloaked in black, their face hidden beneath a hood, and in their hand was a blade that gleamed with dark magic. "Hello, little Omegas," the figure said, their voice soft and mocking. "It's time to come home." Arya's breath caught in her throat as the cloaked figure stepped into the room, the blade in their hand pulsing with an unnatural darkness that seemed to swallow the light. Kyle moved in front of her instinctively, his body tense, ready to fight despite having no weapon, no training, nothing but the desperate need to protect his sister. "Who are you?" Kyle demanded, his voice steadier than Arya expected. The figure laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of bone. "You don't recognize me? How disappointing. Though I suppose it has been 18 years. They reached up and pulled back their hood, revealing a woman's face. angular and beautiful in a cold, sharp way, with pale skin and eyes that glowed a sickly green. Her hair was black as midnight, streaked with silver, and when she smiled, Arya could see that her teeth were slightly too pointed, too sharp. "My name is Severin," the woman said, "and I am the one who gave you life, the one who separated you, the one who has been waiting all these years for you to ripen into exactly what I need." Arya felt ice spread through her veins. "You're the one who engineered the bond." Severin's smile widened. "Clever girl. Yes, I am the architect of your little predicament. I am the one who bound you to the Alpha King, who ensured you would remain apart until the precise moment when your reunion would cause the most chaos." "Why?" Arya whispered. "Because chaos is profitable," Severin said simply. "The Northern Empire paid me handsomely to create a weapon against the Lycian Dominion. And you, my darlings, are that weapon. Twin Omegas bonded to the most powerful Alpha in existence, your very presence enough to tear him apart from the inside. The bond weakening as you grow closer, his power diminishing as his connection to you frays. It's quite elegant, really." Kyle's hands clenched into fists. "We're not weapons." "Oh, but you are," Severin said, taking a step closer. "You always have been. From the moment you drew your first breath, you were mine to shape, mine to use. And now, it's time to collect." She raised the blade, and Arya saw the runes carved into its surface begin to glow with the same sickly green as Severin's eyes. "This blade was forged in the old fires," Severin said. "It can cut bonds, sever connections, unmake what fate has made. And when I plunge it into your hearts, the bond to Thorian will shatter completely, and the backlash will destroy him. The Lycian Dominion will fall, the Northern Empire will rise, and I will be rewarded beyond measure." "You're insane," Arya said, her voice shaking. "I'm ambitious," Severin corrected. "There's a difference." She lunged forward, the blade slicing through the air toward Kyle's chest. Arya screamed and threw herself at Severin, knocking the woman off balance. The blade missed Kale by inches, and Severin snarled, her beautiful face twisting into something monstrous. "Foolish child!" she hissed, backhanding Arya across the face. Arya stumbled, her vision blurring, and Kale caught her before she fell. Blood trickled from her split lip, and the mark on her wrist burned with sudden searing heat. And then something inside her snapped. Power exploded outward from Arya's body, a wave of pure energy that sent Severin flying backward into the wall. The woman hit the stone with a sickening crack and slumped to the ground, momentarily stunned. Arya stared at her hands, her eyes wide with shock. She had felt it, the power, ancient and vast, surging through her veins like liquid fire, and she could still feel it now, coiling beneath her skin, waiting to be unleashed. Kyle grabbed her shoulders, his amber eyes blazing. "What was that?" "I don't know," Arya gasped. I felt it and it—" Severin pushed herself to her feet, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead, her expression twisted with rage. "You dare use magic against me? I taught you that power. I gave it to you." "You gave us nothing," Kale said, and Arya felt his own power flare to life, a mirror of her own. "We were born with this. It's ours." Severin's eyes narrowed. "Then I'll take it back." She raised the blade again, and this time, the runes blazed so brightly that the entire room was bathed in sickly green light. But before she could strike, the door behind her exploded inward, and Thorian stepped through, his armor covered in blood, his silver eyes burning with fury. "Get away from them," he growled, his voice like the rumble of an approaching avalanche. Severin spun to face him, and for the first time, Arya saw fear flicker across her face. "Thorian," she said, forcing a smile. "How lovely to see you again. You have 3 seconds to explain why I shouldn't tear you apart where you stand," Thorian said, his hand going to the massive sword strapped to his back. Severin's smile faltered. "You can't kill me. The spell is already in motion. If I die, the bond shatters, and you die with me. Then we'll all die together," Thorian said, and he drew his sword. The blade sang as it left its sheath, a sound like thunder and steel, and Severin's eyes went wide. "Wait!" she began. But Thorian was already moving. He crossed the room in a blur of motion, his sword swinging in a deadly arc. Severin barely managed to raise her own blade in time to block, and the impact sent her skidding backward across the floor. "You're insane!" she shrieked. "You'll kill yourself!" "Better that than let you live," Thorian snarled, and he struck again. The two of them clashed in a whirlwind of steel and magic, Severin's blade leaving trails of green light in the air, while Thorian's sword cleaved through stone and shadow with equal ease. The room shook with the force of their battle, and Arya and Kale pressed themselves against the wall, barely able to follow the movements. But even as they fought, Arya could feel it. The bond, unraveling faster now, the threads that connected her to Thorian snapping one by one. "Kale," she whispered. "The bond is breaking." Kale grabbed her hand, his eyes desperate. "What do we do?" Arya didn't know. She could feel the power inside her, vast and untamed, but she had no idea how to control it, how to use it to stop what was happening. And then she remembered Alara's words. "The bond is a tool. It can be used by you if you are strong enough, if you are clever enough." Arya closed her eyes and reached out, not toward Thorian, but toward Kale. She felt his presence immediately, a bright flame that burned in perfect harmony with her own, and she pulled on it, drawing their power together. Kale gasped, his hand tightening around hers. "Arya, what are you—" "Trust me," she said, and then she let the power flow. It surged between them, amplified by their connection, doubling and redoubling until it felt like the sun itself was burning in her chest. Arya opened her eyes, and she saw the marks on their wrists blazing with brilliant golden light, so bright it rivaled the sickly green of Severin's magic. Thorian and Severin both froze, turning to stare at the twins. "Impossible," Severin breathed. Arya stepped forward, still holding Kale's hand, and the power flowed from them like a river, washing over the room, filling every corner with warmth and light. "You tried to use us as a weapon," Arya said, her voice ringing with authority she had never known she possessed. "But you forgot one thing. We're not just bonded to Thorian, we're bonded to each other. And that bond is stronger than anything you could ever create." She raised her free hand, and the golden light coalesced into a spear of pure energy. Severin's face went pale. No, you can't." "We can," Kyle said, his own hand rising to mirror Arya's. "And we will." Together, they hurled the spear of light at Severin. The woman screamed, raising her blade to deflect it. But the moment the light touched the dark magic, the blade shattered, fragments of metal and shadow exploding outward. The spear struck Severin in the chest, and she was thrown backward, her body slamming into the wall with enough force to crack the stone. The green light in her eyes flickered and died, and she slumped to the ground, motionless. The room fell silent. Arya and Kale stood there, breathing hard, their hands still clasped, the golden light slowly fading from their marks. Thorian lowered his sword and crossed to them, his silver eyes searching their faces. "Are you hurt?" Arya shook her head, unable to speak. Thorian reached out and gently touched her cheek, his thumb brushing over the bruise where Severin had struck her. The bond pulsed between them, and Arya felt it clearly now. Not fraying, not breaking, but changing, evolving. "The bond," Thorian said quietly. "It's different. It's ours now," Kale said, his voice hoarse. "Not hers, not anyone's, ours." Thorian nodded slowly, and for the first time since Arya had met him, she saw something in his eyes that looked almost like relief. "Then let's finish this," he said. The battle outside the tower had ended by the time they emerged. Thorian's forces had driven back the Northern Empire's soldiers, capturing most of them and scattering the rest. The palace grounds were littered with the dead and wounded, and the air was thick with smoke and the smell of blood. But they had won. Thorian issued orders with swift efficiency, directing his commanders to secure the perimeter and begin treating the wounded. He sent messengers to the border outposts, recalling his armies now that the immediate threat had passed. And he ordered Severin's body to be burned, along with the fragments of her cursed blade. ensuring that no trace of her magic remained. Through it all, Arya and Kyle stayed close to him, bound not just by the mate bond, but by something deeper, a shared understanding of what they had survived, what they had overcome. As dawn broke over the Lycian dominion, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Thorian stood on the palace balcony with the twins at his side. "It's over," Arya said quietly. "For now," Thorian agreed. "But there will be consequences. The Northern Empire will not take this defeat lightly." "Let them come," Kyle said, his amber eyes hard. "We'll be ready." Thorian looked at him, then at Arya, and something in his expression softened. "You fought well, both of you. Without your power, Severin would have succeeded." Arya met his gaze. "We're stronger together. All three of us." Thorian was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "The bond is no longer what it was. Severin's magic is gone, but the connection remains. We are still tied, still linked, but it is a bond of choice now, not compulsion." "What does that mean?" Arya asked. "It means you are free," Thorian said simply. "Free to stay or go. Free to accept the bond or reject it. The choice is yours." Arya and Kyle exchanged a glance, and in that moment, Arya felt the full weight of what he was offering. Freedom. The thing she had craved her entire life, the thing she had fought and bled for. But as she stood there, the morning sun warming her face, Thorian's presence solid and steady beside her, Kale's hand in hers, she realized something. She didn't want to be free of this. Not anymore. "I want to stay," she said. Kale nodded. "So do I." Thorian's eyes widened slightly, as if he had not expected that answer. "You're certain?" "We've spent our whole lives being controlled, being used," Arya said. "But this, what we have now, it's different. It's a choice. And we choose you." For a moment, Thorian simply stared at them, and Arya saw a flicker of something vulnerable in his eyes, something raw and unguarded. Then he inclined his head, a gesture of acceptance and respect. "Then we rebuild. Together." The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. Thorian's advisors worked tirelessly to uncover the full extent of the Northern Empire's conspiracy, identifying and eliminating the remaining spies and collaborators who had infiltrated the Lycian dominion. Treaties were renegotiated, alliances were strengthened, and the balance of power across the continent began to shift in Thorian's favor. Arya and Kale were given positions within the court, not as ornaments or trophies, but as equals. Thorian consulted them on matters of strategy and governance, valuing their insights and perspectives. And slowly, the court began to accept them, not as curiosities or weaknesses, but as integral parts of the Dominion's future. The bond between the three of them continued to evolve. It was no longer the desperate, all-consuming pull that had brought them together, but something deeper, more complex. A partnership built on trust and mutual respect, strengthened by shared trials and victories. Arya learned to harness the power that had awakened inside her, training with Thorian's mages to control and refine it. Kale did the same, and together, they discovered that their combined strength was formidable, enough to protect themselves, enough to defend those they cared about. And in the quiet moments, when the court was asleep and the palace was still, the three of them would gather in Thorian's private chambers, talking late into the night about everything and nothing, building the foundation of something that none of them had ever expected to find: a family. 6 months after Severin's defeat, Arya stood in the palace library, surrounded by ancient texts and scrolls, searching for information about their true heritage. She had become obsessed with uncovering the truth about House Varela, about the noble family that had birthed them and then lost them to greed and conspiracy. Kyle found her there, as he often did, and sat down beside her with a cup of tea. "Any luck?" he asked. Arya shook her head. "Most of the records were destroyed after the rebellion, but I did find this." She pushed a faded piece of parchment toward him, and Kale leaned in to read. It was a genealogy, tracing the Varela bloodline back hundreds of years, through wars and alliances, triumphs and tragedies. And at the very top, in elegant script, was a name that made Kale's breath catch. "Lysander Varela," he read aloud. First Omega King of the Eastern Territories. Arya nodded. We're descended from royalty, Kale. Not just any nobility, but a line of Omega rulers who held power in their own right. Kale stared at the parchment, his mind reeling. That's why they separated us. Why they feared us. Because if we united, if we claimed our birthright, we would be a threat, Arya finished. Not just to the Northern Empire, but to anyone who believes Omegas are meant to be controlled. Kyle set down the parchment and looked at his sister, his amber eyes blazing with determination. Then we'll prove them wrong. We'll show them what Omegas can be when they're free. Arya smiled. Together, Kyle agreed. That night, Arya and Kyle presented their findings to Thorian. He listened in silence as they explained the significance of their lineage, the implications of what they had discovered. When they finished, Thorian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "This changes everything." "It doesn't have to," Arya said quickly. "We're not asking to leave or to claim some throne in the Eastern Territories. We're asking to stay here, with you, and build something new." Thorian's silver eyes searched her face. "And what would that be?" "A dominion where Omegas are not possessions," Kale said. "Where strength is measured not by dominance, but by compassion and unity. Where bonds are chosen, not forced." Thorian leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "You're talking about revolution." "We're talking about evolution," Arya corrected. "A better future. For all of us." Thorian was silent for a long moment. Then he stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city that sprawled below the palace. "I have spent my entire reign maintaining order through strength," he said quietly. "Through fear and power and unwavering control. But you two, you have shown me that there is another way. A better way." He turned to face them, and Arya saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Hope. "If we do this," Thorian said, "it will not be easy. There will be those who resist, who cling to the old ways. It could take years, decades even, to change the hearts and minds of an entire continent. Then we'll take as long as it takes," Arya said. Thorian smiled, a rare, genuine expression that transformed his entire face. "Then let us begin." 1 year later, Arya stood on a platform in the center of the Lycian capital, addressing a crowd of thousands. The plaza was packed with people, alphas, betas, and omegas alike. All of them gathered to witness the formal announcement of the new laws that would reshape the Dominion. Kyle stood beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder, a silent show of support. And behind them, on the throne that had been moved to the platform for this occasion, sat Thorian, his silver eyes watching over them with pride. "Today marks the beginning of a new era," Arya said, her voice amplified by magic so that everyone could hear. "An era where every person, regardless of their designation, has the right to choose their own path, the right to live free from coercion, from bondage, from fear." The crowd murmured, some with approval, others with uncertainty. "I know that change is difficult," Arya continued. "I know that many of you have lived your entire lives believing that Omegas are weak, that they need to be controlled and protected. But I stand before you as proof that this is a lie. We are not weak, we are not helpless, and we will no longer accept a world that treats us as less than whole." Kyle stepped forward. "Together with King Thorian, we have drafted a series of reforms that will abolish forced bonding, outlaw Omega trafficking, and establish protections for those who have been abused or exploited. These laws will be enforced throughout the Lycian Dominion, and any who violate them will face the full weight of the Crown's justice." The crowd erupted into a mix of cheers and protests, and Arya felt her heart pound in her chest. This was it, the moment that would define their future. Thorian rose from his throne and moved to stand between the twins, his presence commanding instant silence. "I have ruled this dominion for 15 years, he said, his voice carrying across the plaza. "I have won wars, crushed rebellions, and built an empire that spans half the known world. But none of that compares to what we are about to accomplish together." He placed a hand on Arya's shoulder and another on Kyle's. "These two Omegas have shown me what true strength looks like. They have faced horrors that would break most people, and they have emerged not as victims, but as leaders. And I will stand with them, now and always, as we forge a new path forward." The crowd fell silent, and for a moment, Arya thought they had failed, that the people would reject their vision. And then someone in the crowd began to clap. It started slowly, a single person, then another, and another, until the entire plaza was filled with the sound of applause. Omegas wept openly, Alphas nodded in approval, and even the most skeptical betas seemed to recognize that something important was happening. Arya felt tears prick her eyes, and she turned to look at Kyle, who was grinning widely. "We did it," he whispered. "We did," Arya agreed. Thorian squeezed their shoulders, and when Arya looked up at him, she saw the same pride reflected in his eyes. And in that moment, surrounded by the people they would lead, the bond between them pulsed with warmth and certainty. They had found each other. They had found their purpose. And together, they would change the world. 5 years later, Arya sat in the garden of the palace, watching as children played among the flowers. They were Omega children, orphans who had been rescued from the labor camps and breeding houses that had once dotted the Dominion, now living in safety and freedom under the Crown's protection. Kale joined her on the bench, handing her a cup of tea. "They're thriving," he said, nodding toward the children. "They are," Arya agreed. "It's hard to believe how much has changed." Kyle smiled. "It's hard to believe how much we've changed." Arya looked down at the mark on her wrist, which no longer burned or pulled or demanded. It was simply there, a reminder of where she had come from and what she had overcome. "Do you ever regret it?" Kale asked quietly. "Choosing to stay?" Arya shook her head. "Not for a second. This is where we belong." Kyle nodded, his own expression peaceful. "I feel the same." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the children play, until Thorian emerged from the palace and crossed the garden to join them. He had aged well in the years since they had met, the harsh lines of his face softening slightly, though his silver eyes remained as sharp as ever. He sat down on the other side of Arya, and she leaned against him, feeling the steady warmth of his presence. "The Southern Dominion has agreed to adopt our reforms," Thorian said. "It took longer than expected, but the council finally voted in favor." Arya's eyes widened. "That's incredible." "It is," Thorian agreed. "And it's because of you two. Because you refused to give up, refused to accept the world as it was." Kyle grinned. "We're just getting started." Thorian chuckled, a sound that still surprised Arya even after all these years. "I don't doubt it." As the sun set over the Lycian Dominion, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Arya felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. She had started her journey as a broken, powerless Omega, alone and afraid, but she had found her twin, her mate, her purpose, and together they had built something beautiful, something that would last long after they were gone, a legacy of freedom, of choice, of love. And as the three of them sat there, surrounded by the life they had fought so hard to create, the bond between them hummed with quiet certainty. They were exactly where they were meant to be, together, always.